an instant amount of cash at the Federal Reserve. There is an instant amount of cash at the Federal Reserve. There is an instant amount of cash at the Federal Reserve.
Good morning, Bitcoin. Today is Thursday, June 4th, 2020. My name is Thomas Hunt, and this is the World Crypto Network. The price of Bitcoin is up 2% in the last 24 hours, with a last of 9,765, a high of 9,791, and a low of 9,461. That's $1 for 10,241 Satoshis. Volume was a little high for a weekend with around 3,580 Bitcoins changing hands. The market continues to lean margin long, with 85% of the market heading that direction. Bitcoin dominance was at 65.8%. We're going to start off with a reading from It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis, using my lovely first edition from 1935. How about that? Still works. Amazing, huh? Compatible. Book compatible. Chapter 25. Holidays were invented by the devil to coax people into the heresy that happiness can be won by taking thought. What was planned as a rackety day for David's first Christmas with his grandparents was, they saw too well, perhaps David's last Christmas with them. Mary had hidden her weeping, but the day before Christmas, when Shad Ledoux tramped in to demand of Doremus whether Karl Pascal had ever spoken to him of communism, Mary came on Shad in the hall, stared at him, raised her hand like a boxing cat, and said with dreadful quietness, "You murderer, I shall kill you and kill Swan." For once, Shad did not look amused. To make the holiday as good an imitation of mirth as possible, they were very noisy. But their holly, their tinsel stars on a tall pine tree, their family devotion in a serene old house in a little town, was no different at heart from despairing drunkenness in the city night. Doremus reflected that it might as well have just been for all of them to get drunk and let themselves go, elbows on a slopped cafe tables, as to toil at this pretense of domestic bliss. He now had another thing for which to hate the corpos, for stealing the secure affection of Christmas. For noon dinner, Louis Roastern was invited because he was a lorn bachelor, and still more because he was a Jew, now insecure and snubbed and threatened in an insane dictatorship. There is no greater compliment to the Jews than the fact that the degree of their unpopularity is always the scientific measure of the cruelty and silliness of the regime under which they live, so that even a commercial-minded, money-fondling, heavy humorous Jew burgher like Roastern is still a sensitive meter of barbarism. After dinner came Buck Titus, David's most favorite person, bearing staggering amounts of Woolsworth tractors and fire engines and a real bow and arrow, and he was raucously insisting that Mrs. Candy dance with him, what he was not very precisely called the light fantastic, when the hammering sounded at the door. R.S. Dilly trampled in with 4 men. "Looking for Roastern." "Oh, that you, Louis? Get your coat and come on." "Orders." "What's the idea? What do you want of him? What's the charge?" demanded Buck, still standing with his arm around Mrs. Candy's embarrassed waist. "Dunno there's going to be any charges. Just ordered to headquarters for questioning. District Commissioner Reek in town. Just asking a few people questions. Come on, you." The hilarious celebrants did not, as they had planned, go out to Lorinda's tavern for skiing. Next day they heard that Roastern had been taken to the old concentration camp at Trianon. along with that crabbed old Tory, Raymond Pridewell, the hardware dealer. Both imprisonments were incredible. Rostern had been too meek, and if Pridewell had ever been meek, if he had constantly and testily and loudly proclaimed that he had not cared for Ledoux as a hired man, and now cared even less for him as a local governor, why, Pridewell was a sacred institution. As well think of dragging the Brownstone Baptist Church to prison. Later, a friend of Shad Ledoux took over Rostern's shop. It can happen here, meditated Dormus. It could happen to him. How soon? Before he should be arrested, he must make amends with his conscience by quitting the Informer. Professor Victor Loveland, once a classicist of Isaiah College, having been fired from a labor camp for incompetence in teaching arithmetic to lumberjacks, was in town with his wife and babies on his way to a job clerking at his uncle's slate quarry near Fairhaven. He called upon Dormus and was hysterically cheerful. He called upon Clarence Little, dropped in to visit with him, Clarence would have said. Now that twitchy, intense jeweler Clarence, who had been born on a Vermont farm, had supported his mother till she died when he was 30, had longed to go to college, and especially to study Greek. Though Loveland was his own age, in the mid-30s, he looked on him as a combination of Keats and Liddell. His greatest moment had been hearing Loveland read Homer. Loveland was leaning on the counter. "Gone ahead with your Latin grammar, Clarence?" "Golly, Professor, it just doesn't seem worthwhile anymore. I guess I'm kind of a weak sister anyway, but I find that these days it's about all I can do to just keep going." "Me too. And don't call me Professor. I'm a timekeeper in a slate quarry. What a life." They had not noticed the clumsy-looking man in plain clothes who had just come in. Presumably, he was a customer. But he grumbled. "So you pansies don't like the way things go nowadays? Don't suppose you like the corpos? Don't think much of the chief?" He jabbed his thumb into Loveland's rib so painfully that Loveland yelled, "I don't think about him at all." "Oh, you don't, eh? Well, you two fairies can come down to the courthouse with me." "And who may you be?" "Oh, just an ensign in the M.M.'s. That's all." He had an automatic pistol. Loveland was not beaten much, because he managed to keep his mouth shut. But Little was so hysterical that they laid him on a kitchen table and decorated his naked back with 40 slashes of a steel ramrod. They had found that Clarence wore yellow silk underwear, and the M.M.'s from Factory and Plowland laughed, particularly one broad young inspector who was rumored to have a passionate friendship with a battalion leader from Nashua, who was fat, eyeglassed, and high-pitched of voice. Little had to be helped into the truck, too, Loveland that carried him to the Trianon concentration camp. One eye was closed, and so surrounded with the bruised flesh that the M.M. driver said had looked like a Spanish omelet. The truck was an open body, but they could not escape, because the 3 prisoners on this trip were chained hand to hand. They lay on the floor of the truck. It was snowing. Just a couple Americans getting taken to an American concentration camp from the book It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis. Of course, he was writing that in 1935. But first, the Bitcoin news. Bloomberg analyst predicts 20K Bitcoin this year. Nice. Bitcoin mining difficulty drops 9% to January levels. Bitcoin has just got easier to mine. That's not a very grammatical sentence. But yes, it does seem like more and more old equipment is being turned off, allowing the Bitcoin halving rate to slow down a little bit. This normally doesn't happen, the rate usually just goes up. But around the halvenings, some things are different. You know, the mining reward has been cut from 12.5 to 6.25. So for a lot of people, it might not make sense to mine anymore. And for others, it might just be old equipment or cycling equipment in and out. Stack Sats Bitcoin figure tells Europe as ECB prepares $1.5 trillion bailout.
There is an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve.
There must be an infinite amount at the European Central Bank as well. Bitcoin Bart Simpson trading pattern returns with volatility. This is in Bloomberg. So it's really strange to see how quickly Bitcoin joke terms like a Bart Simpson becomes an official word in Bloomberg. So there it is. You can see the pattern on the chart. Bart Simpson pattern as Bitcoin rallies, then falls below 10,000. That's great. Miners are selling more of their Bitcoin. That might actually be bullish. I'm not sure that it really goes either way. I just think the miners have to sell to maintain their electricity and to maintain their new miners. And now miners are going to have to sell more because of the halvening. So I don't really think that it weighs either direction on the price. It more weighs on the reality of the halvening. Bitcoin, gold, most likely assets to thrive in 2020. Well, you tell us now. It's halfway through the year. It's June. Where were you in January? Satoshi Nakamoto. Traders accuse Coinbase of pulling the plug when Bitcoin makes sharp moves. Oh, it's getting worse. Originally, we just thought Coinbase was incompetent and their servers were crashing because of too much interest in Bitcoin. Perhaps people wanting to sign up to buy it or people wanting to log in to sell it. Either way, we figured it was a problem with their interface, with their servers, with their software design. Now, Nakamoto says that traders think they're pulling the plug on purpose. The price of Bitcoin is up 2.05% in the last 24 hours, with a last of 9,784, a high of 9,865, and a low of 9,461. That's $1 for 10,224 Satoshis. Volume was pretty normal for a weekday, with 3,962 Bitcoins changing hands. The market continues to lean margin long, with 85% of the market heading that direction. Bitcoin dominance was at 65.86%. And now our top story. James Mattis denounces President Trump, describes him as a threat to the Constitution. In an extraordinary condemnation, the former defense secretary backs protesters and says the president is trying to turn Americans against one another. James Mattis, the esteemed Marine general who resigned as Secretary of Defense in December 2018 to protest Donald Trump's Syria policy, has, ever since, kept studiously silent about Trump's performance as president. But he has now broken his silence, writing an extraordinary broadside in which he denounces the president for dividing the nation and accuses him of ordering the U.S. military to violate the constitutional rights of American citizens. I have watched this week's unfolding events angry and appalled, Mattis writes. The words equal justice under the law are carved into the pediment of the United States Supreme Court. This is exactly what the protesters are rightly demanding. It is a wholesome and unifying demand, one that all of us should be able to get behind. We must not be distracted by a small number of lawbreakers. The protests are defined by tens of thousands of people of conscience who are insisting that we live up to our values as people, and our values as a nation. We must reject and hold accountable those in office who would make a mockery of our Constitution. Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people. He does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years of this deliberate effort. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years without mature leadership. We can unite without him, drawing on the strengths inherent in our civil society. This will not be easy, as the past few days have shown, but we owe it to our fellow citizens, to past generations that have bled to defend our promise, and to our children. Instructions given by the military departments to our troops before the Normandy invasion reminded soldiers that the Nazi slogan for destroying us was divide and conquer. Our American answer is, in union there is strength. We must summon that unity to surmount this crisis, confident that we are better than our politics. Mattis's dissatisfaction with Trump is no secret inside the Pentagon, but after his resignation, he argued publicly, and to great criticism, that it would be inappropriate and counterproductive for a former general, a former cabinet official, to criticize a sitting president. Doing so, he said, would threaten the apolitical nature of the military. When I interviewed him last year on this subject, he said, "When you leave an administration over clear policy differences, you need to give the people who are still there as much opportunity as possible to defend the country. They still have the responsibility of protecting this great big experiment of ours." He did add, however, "There is a period in which I owe my silence. It's not eternal. It's not going to be forever." That period is definitely over. Mattis reached the conclusion this past weekend that the American experiment is directly threatened by the actions of the president he once served. In his statement, Mattis makes it clear that the president's response to the police killing of George Floyd and the ensuing protests triggered this public condemnation. "When I joined the military some 50 years ago," he writes, "I swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. Never did I dream that troops that take the same oath would be ordered under any circumstance to violate the constitutional rights of their fellow citizens, much less to provide a bizarre photo op for the elected commander-in-chief with military leadership standing alongside." He goes on to implicitly criticize the current Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, and other senior officials as well. "We must reject any thinking of our cities as a battle space that our uniformed military is called upon to dominate. At home, we should use our military only when requested to do so on very rare occasions by state governors. Militarizing our response, as we witnessed in Washington, D.C., sets up a conflict, a false conflict, between military and civilian society. It erodes the moral ground that ensures a trusted bond between men and women in uniform and the society they are sworn to protect, and of they themselves are a part. Keeping public order rests within a civilian state and local leaders who best understand their communities and are answerable to them." General Mattis denounces Trump. This comes on the heels of another article from The Atlantic from 2 days ago, June 2nd. Admiral Mike Mullen, the 17th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "I cannot remain silent. Our fellow citizens are not the enemy and must never become so." It sickened me yesterday to see security personnel, including members of the National Guard, forcibly and violently clear a path through Lafayette Square to accommodate the president's visit outside St. John's Church. I have to date been reticent to speak out on issues surrounding President Trump's leadership, but we are at an inflection point, and the events of the past few weeks have made it impossible to remain silent. Whatever Trump's goal in conducting his visit, He laid bare his disdain for the rights of peaceful protest in this country, gave succor to the leaders of other countries who take comfort in our domestic strife, and risked further politicizing the men and women of our armed forces. There was little good in the stunt. While no one should ever condone the violence, vandalism, and looting that has exploded across our city streets, neither should anyone lose sight of the larger and deeper concerns about institutional racism that have ignited this rage. As a white man, I cannot claim perfect understanding of the fear and anger that African Americans feel today, but as someone who has been around a while, I know enough, and I've seen enough, to understand that those feelings are real and that they are all too painfully founded. We must, as citizens, address head-on the issue of police brutality and sustained injustices against the African American community. We must, as citizens, support and defend the right, indeed the solemn obligation, to peacefully assemble and to be heard. These are not mutually exclusive pursuits, and neither of these pursuits will be made easier or safer by an overly aggressive use of our military, active duty, or National Guard. The United States has a long and, to be fair, sometimes troubled history of using the armed forces to enforce domestic laws. The issue for us today is not whether this authority exists, but whether it will be wisely administered. I remain confident in the professionalism of our men and women in uniform. They will serve with skill and with compassion. They will obey lawful orders. But I am less confident in the soundness of the orders they will be given by this Commander-in-Chief. And I am not convinced that the conditions on our streets, as bad as they are, have risen to the level that justifies a heavy reliance on military troops. Certainly, we have not crossed the threshold that would make it appropriate to invoke the provisions of the Insurrection Act. Furthermore, I am deeply worried that as they execute their orders, the members of our military will become co-opted for political purposes. Even in the midst of the carnage we are now witnessing, we must endeavor to see American cities and towns as our homes and our neighborhoods. They are not battle spaces to be dominated, and must never become so. We must ensure that African Americans, indeed all Americans, are given the same rights under the Constitution, the same justice under the law, and the same consideration we give to members of our own family. Our fellow citizens are not the enemy and must never become so. Too many foreign and domestic policy choices have become militarized. Too many military missions have become politicized. This is not the time for stunts. This is the time for leadership. Mike Mullen is a retired admiral from the U.S. Navy and was the 17th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Shout out to the Atlantic magazine, huh? If I keep reading so many of their articles, I'm going to have to get a subscription or something. It's out of control. Had that long one yesterday, the two long ones today. Both the general and the admiral chose to speak directly to Atlantic magazine, the Atlantic. So shout out to the Atlantic. Good work. Getting it done. Not sure it's worth, I don't know, they want $50 a year for the online and $60 for the online with the print. That's a pretty penny, but we'll see how that goes. And now, the news. Trump went ballistic in the White House today when he heard Defense Secretary Esper went publicly against his plan to invade states with a U.S. military. This is true. Earlier in the day, Defense Secretary Esper, who did walk across the street with President Trump, had a change of heart and said maybe we shouldn't send the military in. By the end of the day, after a constant assault from Trump and his friends, the Defense Secretary changed his mind and said maybe we should send in some of the military. So much for that conscience. Lasted really long, half a day. It's an interesting video from Whitestone, Queens. A man gets out of his car with what they described as a knife contraption and attempts to murder just people on the street. Maybe they're protesters, but still. Wait till you see the knife contraption. This is, I don't want to say it's a Klingon batleth, but it seems in the batleth family. It very much has a look of a video game weapon or some other kind of joke thing. It doesn't even seem like there's a lot of protesters or they're really causing trouble, but here he is, look. He says somebody threw stuff at his car. So he's going to stab them to death with his knife contraption. You got to also look at how fast he is. He must put it on in the car. So let's see, so he drives up, doesn't have it on, he's driving the car. Right about here, okay, stop the car. 1, 2, 3. He's got that on really fast. I guess it's a heck of a weapon. You can just put your arm into it, and then pretty soon you've got knives for hands. Kind of like Edward Scissorhands. I don't know what that's really for. Maybe it's a yard tool. But yeah, very bizarre video from Queens of a man attacking people with knives. I'm glad no one was hurt. But that's a nice, that breaks it up, right? It kind of clears out the tension. Ice-T. These unfortunate times will give you a good chance to see where your friends and co-workers stand. You may be surprised. Breaking news, Attorney General Keith Ellison is increasing charges against ex-officer Derek Chauvin to second-degree murder in George Floyd's murder, and are also charging 3 other officers. So this did happen yesterday, finally, right? Does that mean everything's over now? No, sadly, things are not over. As we'll learn at some point in the news, there was a shooting in Vallejo. Seems almost as bad as the George Floyd murder, but we'll get to the details on that later. 3 more officers to be charged in the death. Senator Klobuchar was very excited to tell people about this, broke the rules, released it early, wanted all the credit, but don't forget, she had the chance to prosecute Derek Chauvin when she was in the prosecutor's office in Minnesota, and she did not. At the time, Derek Chauvin, the officer who murdered George Floyd, was accused of murdering a Native American man who he shot. So crazy stuff. Lindsey Graham, who we talked about in detail yesterday, this was the former JAG lawyer. This was the military man who volunteered in the National Guard even after his tour of service was over. The contrast to Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney was the corporate lawyer. Mitt Romney had barely spent any time in government. But as it turned out, it was Mitt Romney who stood up against Trump, not Lindsey Graham, the JAG lawyer, the former military, the one who was trained by the military to understand our country. Well, it turns out he's just dyed his hair to look like Trump. He's dyed his hair blonde. So this is the ultimate low of what we were talking about yesterday with collaboration. Lindsey Graham, an unlikely collaborator, has gone so far into collaborating that he's dyeing his hair blonde to look like the president. Embarrassing. Unbelievable. I hope it's a Photoshop. I hope they come back later and someone's like, that was a lie, blah, 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 blah. Because, yeah, if that's real, that's pretty bad. Here's a statue of Christopher Columbus in Boston. You can see on the base it says Black Lives Matter, and that the head has been doused with red paint, making it look like blood all over Columbus. Kind of artistic, really. Here's a cop. He's forcing a weapon into the protester's hand to create probable cause. But again, guys, video. So right there, he runs in with the machete. You see him forcing the machete into the gentleman's hand. Guy won't take it. He won't take the machete. They're trying to put the stick on him. There's another cop just trying to plant it. Now they have the weapon in the hand. The third cop, look, they just pounded his hand to get the weapon out of it that they just gave to him. So that's a great scene. You're looking good there. So you gotta watch it from right here. Guy runs in with the machete to plant. Here's the planter. Got the machete. Right here. You see the machete. Hey, hold on to this. Just put this in your hand. The guy's like, I'm not holding on to that. Now they're pounding him for the weapon that they gave him. President Trump's press secretary went on another lying campaign yesterday. She's really doing beautiful work out there. She said it was a very powerful moment and a leadership moment when the president tear-gassed American citizens so he could have a photo op. She also compared it to Churchill when he toured the bombed-out buildings of the London Blitz. She compared it to President George W. Bush when he threw the baseball after 9/11. She said it was a very powerful moment and a leadership moment. Which, of course, reminded me of the classic Joseph Goebbels quote, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it." I don't think she's going to have much luck there. As Ian says, I mean, gassing and beating peaceful protesters so you can go for a walk is a sort of leadership, so long as the people you're leading are the Gestapo. Yes, the other officers will be charged. Just last year, reminder from Robert Reich, Congress banned the export of tear gas to Hong Kong police in a show of solidarity with pro-democracy protesters. If we can do it for them, we can do it for us. Here's a video from Des Moines, Iowa, of protesters being arrested in their own apartment elevator in their complex on their way up to their room. They're not on the street. They're not bothering anyone. But watch as the officers break into the elevator of their own apartment complex to drag them out. Especially want to get the great comment on the front, the guy says, because he knows it's about to happen.
Dude, yesterday system.
He's about to mace them there. She has a baby. They were pointing the mace at the baby, too. So there you go. In their own apartment complex. Not even on the street. Ah, here she is. I also thought this was great when you actually listen to the words. She takes the ancient spiritual, "we shall overcome," right? She rephrases it to, "we will not be overcome." Watch this magnificent liar do her work. She's a songbird of propaganda.
Why did the president feel it was important to go walk over there through the park into the church?
It was extremely important. Look, the president wanted to send a very powerful message that we will not be overcome by looting, by rioting, by burning. This is not what defines America. And going and standing by St. John's Church was a very important moment. And I would note that through all of time, we've seen presidents and leaders across the world who have had leadership moments and very powerful
She can't even
symbols that
say
were
it.
important for a nation to see at any given time to show a message of resilience and determination. Like Churchill, we saw him inspecting the bombing damage. It sent a powerful message of leadership to the British people, and George W. Bush throwing out the ceremonial first pitch after 9/11, and Jimmy Carter putting on a sweater to encourage energy savings, and George H.W. Bush signing the Americans with Disabilities Act flanked by 2 disabled Americans. And for this president, it was powerful and important to send a message that the rioters, the looters, the anarchists, they will not prevail, that burning churches are not what America's about. And that moment, holding the Bible up, is something that has been widely hailed by Franklin Graham and others, and it was a very important symbol for the American people to see that we will get through this through unity and through faith.
Oh, I know. Oh, it's really too much. As George Orwell said, the past was erased. The erasure was forgotten. The lie became the truth. Oh, there's a whole side story about Drew Brees. We could go into it. It's pretty disappointing. There's kind of a logical fallacy in his brain. He says that no matter what, you cannot disrespect the American flag. So he's in trouble already. He's an absolutist. So he can't understand Colin Kaepernick's protest because it doesn't fit in his absolutist worldview. For him, it's absolutist, right? It's all or nothing. It's existential. It's all the eggs in the one basket. No other possibilities, no possibilities of gray. Everything for Drew Brees is white and black. You respect the flag at all times. So he's having a real problem with that, given that his entire team is full of, of other people, right? Other people who can think differently, who don't have to see things as white and black. People who have the ability to see things as gray. And they're trying to talk to Drew Brees, and they're trying to break him out of it, and he is just sticking with it. So we'll see how that goes. I wouldn't do that if my job and my life depended on my offensive line blocking people and my defensive line practiced against me in practice. I don't know. I just think he's not really thinking about it. He can't get past this absolutism. And a lot of people have this with religion too. You can't even discuss anything about religion with them because it just hits that wall. And all of the critical thinking stops when they hit that wall. That's the wall of no more thought. Christopher Bouzet writes, this moment feels like the Me Too movement, but for civil rights and criminal justice. I wouldn't be surprised if hundreds or even thousands of police officers across the country are fired and or prosecuted. Let's see. Oh yeah, this is sad. Darnella Frazier is the 17-year-old girl who recorded George Floyd's death. She's now getting psychological help for not only witnessing something so terrifying, but for being bullied for not getting involved. So let's take a moment and remember that this video was brought to us by a 17-year-old girl. It's not her place to know that she should run over there and knock the cops over. And it's a very unique situation where actually violating with the police would have been the right thing to do. But that's a case-by-case situation. If you don't have a lot of experience, if you haven't prepared for it, you're not ready for it. And she did more than enough just by filming what is a truly horrible thing, and by just continuing to film and then releasing it too. So Darnella Frazier, let's think good thoughts of her. Oh, let's see this one. I don't know what's happening in this one. Let's see. Oh, well, let's give it a try anyway. Oh, I see. In the white text, it says the girl in the flannel is diabetic and is requesting to have her bag so she could have her insulin. But the officers will not allow her bag to be near her, and they are taking her bag away so that she's separate from her insulin. So if she had a diabetic attack, they would have to go to wherever her bag was, bring it back, and give her insulin, likely while she'd be dead. So not a lot of concern given. Why are you laughing? Oh, he's laughing.
Why are you laughing?
Let's go back.
Have a seat.
Why are you laughing?
Wow, it's Uncle Tom the fucking...
What are you laughing at? This isn't funny. That's not funny to you?
Just being sick.
We were trying to leave. I saw people that were waiting to go home, and I picked them up.
So there you go, officer laughing at a woman who just wanted her insulin from her bag. That was in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America. It is time to embrace the parallels, to be unafraid to speak a clear truth. Whether by design or the lack of it, Donald Trump and the Republican Party operate an American state that they have increasingly organized on fascist principles. So people are not pulling punches anymore. Fascism is out. That's corporate government. And also Hitler is out. You can compare the president to Hitler now because he's done so many things that are just what Hitler would do. President Obama made a speech yesterday. As Scott Dworkin says, President Obama gave Trump time to lead and time to respond. He's clearly given up on Trump. Today, Obama did what a president does. He challenged all mayors to analyze their use of force. He challenged all elected officials to do better. And he gave ideas because Obama is a real president. As much as I was never a great fan of Obama, it was fantastic to hear him speak yesterday, to hear him talk clearly in complete sentences with ideas, and like Mr. Dworkin says, to give us an idea and to challenge the mayor. President Obama asked us to go from the ground up to try to solve this problem, and for the first time since the George Floyd murder crisis began, we actually have a little bit of hope. We actually have a plan of what we can do going forward. If all of the mayors, if all of the local governments begin controlling their police force in a different way, perhaps we could avoid having these things happen in the future. Ex-president, unimpeached President Trump has done none of these things. He's offered no hope. He's offered no plan. He's not analyzed the situation. He's just simply offered to deploy the military. President Trump claimed that he was not taken to the bunker. Says that he was just inspecting it. However, as we'd find out a few hours later, he was actually taken to the bunker. He lied about just inspecting it. He was not just inspecting it. He was taken there on Friday. Let's listen to just a little bit of President Obama and be reminded of what a real president sounds like.
In a lot of ways, what has happened over the last several weeks is challenges and structural problems here in the United States have been thrown into high relief. They're the outcomes not just of the immediate moments in time, but they're the result of a long history of slavery and Jim Crow and redlining and institutionalized racism that too often have been the plague, this original sin of our society. And in some ways, as tragic as these past few weeks have been, as difficult and scary and uncertain as they've been, they've also been an incredible opportunity for people to be awakened to some of these underlying trends.
Very nice speech there by the former president. Just a little bit of it, not the whole thing. Imagine if shit got so bad during the Obama presidency, he did such a terrible job of showing leadership that George Bush needed to do his job for him. Trump's presidency is over. As we said earlier, Esper reversed his decision to return active duty troops deployed near D.C. to home bases. He's going to continue to allow the invasion of Washington, D.C. Once again, why is this invasion happening? Well, there's a unique legal loophole. Washington, D.C. is a district. It is the District of Columbia. It is not a state. They've been fighting for statehood for a long time. If Washington, D.C. was a state, the president would have to ask the governor of Washington, D.C. if he's allowed to bring the troops in. The answer would likely be no. Since there is no governor, since they're not a state, the president can just bring troops in. And now the defense secretary, for about half a day, seemed like he had a conscience. Turns out he changed his mind. Bad news for CoinFest. The Renaissance Manchester Hotel is being closed. I followed up online. It's actually being torn down. They were very excited about tearing it down. They said it was an old building near the waterfront, and they'd had their eyes on it for a long time. So they're likely going to move the event to a similar location in Manchester, England. Check it out on October 23rd, 24th, and 25th. CoinFest in Manchester. George Takai writes, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are locked in a very tight race in Texas, with Trump receiving 44% and Biden receiving 43% in a general election matchup, according to Quinnipiac University poll released today. When we take Texas for good, it's game over for the GOP in national elections. Thank you, George Takei. We talked about this, the incredible denouncement of President Trump by former Defense Secretary James Mattis. Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people. He does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. Jelani Cobb writes, Obama is showing off with these complete sentences. It was impressive to see a well-spoken and intelligent president speak for a change. Here's a new advertisement from the Lincoln Project. It says, Donald Trump is no longer hiding that he's a brazen authoritarian, so desiring of control and power that he's willing to turn our once peaceful cities into war zones.
When Donald Trump came out of hiding this week, he didn't do it to bring us together or heal the nation. He wasn't there to offer words of calm and comfort. Instead, he became what we always feared, evoked the worst of our past, threatened our governors and states. He ordered our own soldiers who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan to flood the streets, instructing them to turn against Americans, used churches and the Holy Bible as political props. He didn't invoke the Lord to give us wisdom, but to boost his polls. Ordered an attack on unarmed protesters using gas, rubber bullets, and flash grenades. Washington transformed into a war zone for this coward. This is a time for choosing. America or Trump.
That's paid for by the Lincoln Project, which is a group of Republicans. That's right. Lincoln was a Republican, and it's Republicans advertising against Donald Trump. A fantastic ad, really quick turnaround. I love the part where they say, they turn the streets into war zone for this coward. Great stuff. Dan Rather writes, many wondered when James Mattis would speak. He just did, and it's quite a statement of principle. Never did I dream that troops taking the same oath would be ordered under any circumstance to violate the constitutional rights of their fellow citizens, much less to provide a bizarre photo op for the elected commander-in-chief, with military leadership standing alongside. More information on these officers outside of the Lincoln Memorial who did not have insignia, name badges, or identifying units. This guy has no identifying information, no agency affiliation, but he does have a knife strapped to his chest. We later found out some of these officers were from the Utah National Guard. Others were from the Bureau of Prisons. However, if they were deployed outside of the United States, this would be, anybody? Audience? Wait for it. A war crime. A war crime. That's right. It's a war crime to not have your unit insignia, your name badge, etc., to show that you are a member of the United States military or another branch of the military. It's illegal. It's a war crime. Why are they doing this on the streets of America? Whose idea was this? Why did they make these troops go out without insignia, as well as the NYPD, who are covering up their badge numbers with black flags? Great stuff. They say the media is not showing this, so we're going to show it. So here's looks like a white guy with a skateboard breaking a window. I'm going to, mute the music because that's definitely going to get us a copyright flag or whatever. So he's smashing windows with his skateboard. And a black guy comes up, takes the skateboard from him. Nope, we ain't having that. Not around here, no more. Everybody else is standing up, and they form a little line to keep him from continuing to smash what looks like Ray's hair shop. I'm sure Ray's hair shop was involved in this protest. So there are good protesters who are taking their lives into their own hands, trying to stop the looters. These looters could have knives, could stab them and stuff. They're not police officers. They're not trained to fight looters. But as you can see in this video, the protesters did the right thing and took the skateboard away from the guy that was using it to smash up the business. Shout out to Reward Pool. My friend Crypto Raptor's working on it over there at rewardportal.com. They've got a new logo, and they're going Bitcoin only. You can also use the Lightning Network there to get paid in Satoshis for taking surveys. Give it a try at Reward Portal. It's a great way to try out the Lightning Network. Maybe get just a couple Satoshis going, huh? Stunning scene in downtown D.C. as the sun begins to set. Thousands are lying on the hot pavement in extreme heat and humidity, baking underneath their masks, almost a week into the protests, and they're chanting, "I can't breathe." Again, look how effective the Gandhi tactics are. Lying down on the ground, they cannot be cleared, they cannot be taken away except being dragged off individually, and they're doing a very effective job of blocking the street as well. This is a peaceful protest in America.
I can't breathe. 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 I can't breathe.
It's also possible that might be FBI headquarters there in the background, so it could be even an FBI targeted protest. So, Robert Reich says, "Thank you, General James Mattis," and he quotes some of the speech as well. Of course, if Mattis had spoken up 2 years ago, maybe the Senate would have voted to remove President Trump from office. That's true. Update on those water bottles that we saw the police stabbing and smashing yesterday. Turns out it's from Asheville, and that the Asheville police surrounded a medic station, which was created by protesters as they stabbed water bottles with knives and tipped over tables of medical supplies and food. The medic team, made of EMTs, doctors, said the medic station was approved by the city. And additionally, I'm not sure I have the tweet right here, destroying and attacking a medical tent is, judges, can we wait for it? Over there? That's right, it's a war crime. It's a war crime to attack a medical station. It's a war crime to destroy supplies that are intended for sick or wounded people. This is a war crime. Right here in the United States of America. Isn't that great? Oh, it's great. Facebook continues to fight for their ability to be a non-judgmental platform, to be an open platform. Zuckerberg is now claiming that the president saying, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, is not violent. It's allowed. It's allowed to incite violence because it's a state use of force. it's a state use of force, so it's allowed. So Tiananmen Square massacre, okay on Facebook. Stalin murdering all those people, the purges, okay by Facebook. Hitler wants to put a bunch of people on a train, take them out of town, see what happens. That's okay by Facebook because that's a state use of force, and that makes it okay. You lost it, Zuckerberg. You lost it. And remember, this is all about them not being regulated. They don't want to be regulated. Well, regulation is coming. Also, a shout out to Sacha Baron Cohen, Ali G himself, tweeting this out. Ali G. Here's another stunning picture of protesters. This is from the United States Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The protesters are lying on their chests in this video. And again, Gandhi tactics. Oh, it's a die-in. Police can't do anything about this. They'd have to drag them all off individually, laying down, sitting down, counterintuitive, dangerous, certainly. But if you all work together, if you all do it at the same time, and I'm told they held this die-in for 9 minutes to simulate the death of George Floyd. And now a moment of silence. Sorry. Powerful. Powerful protest. Uh-oh, don't take your eye off the ball because COVID-19 is still out there. It loves that a lot of people have been wearing masks at the protests. COVID thinks that's a great way to try to control it. But look at Alabama. Alabama has a new daily high in cases, over 500. Arizona, also over 500 new daily confirmed cases in Arizona. And South Carolina, new daily confirmed cases. Great stuff from the COVID-19, the virus that you forgot about. But don't worry, COVID didn't forget about you. It's still out there. Here's the National Guard unloading 9 buses into Washington, D.C. 9 buses of troops being unpacked into the nation's capital. Nothing to see here. Move along. Move along. That's weird. Wow, we got flagged as containing sensitive content. That seems very unlikely. That's very strange. So yeah, our reading, shout out to Arthur. He said that we had a thought-provoking reading by Mad Bitcoins of an Atlantic article that references the Stasi in relation to Trump's modus operandi. And he linked to our video from yesterday on YouTube. And did you see that there? Twitter flagged us. So we're at the big time, everybody. So be sure to give us a thumbs up and a share. Reading out an article that may help you right there has been flagged as dangerous content. Here's another. We can't have singing. Music is a no-go. But here's a candlelight vigil. Looks to be still in Washington, D.C. Again, celebrating the life of George Floyd and protesting his untimely death at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department. Powerful scene. Seth Maskett. This is an important message. General Mattis has authorized the use of Hitler analogies. That's right. Godwin's law has been suspended, and we are now authorizing the use of Hitler analogies. Pass it on. President Trump responded to General Mattis, of course, attacking him personally on Twitter, like any other strong man would do. Strong man with a tiny hands. Probably the only thing Barack and Obama and I have in common is that we both had the honor of firing Jim Mattis, the world's most overrated general. I asked for his letter of resignation and felt great about it. His nickname was Chaos, which stands for Colonel has an awesome suggestion or something like that. Colonel has a suggestion. So I gave him a new life, things to do, and battles to win, but he seldom brought home the bacon. I didn't like his leadership style much, and much else about him, and many others agree. Glad he's gone. I love how he just opens right out. The world's most overrated general that you hired to be your defense secretary? Like, most overrated? Oh, the weakness. He just exposes the weakness all the time. Check out Seattle. Seattle got rid of their curfew yesterday and allowed the protesters to stay in place. It looked like this for quite a while, a standoff. At certain point, some protesters may have been throwing water bottles or something at the police officer, so police got a little upset about that, but they had a peaceful protest all night. What happened? The protesters just stayed. Some of them stayed there, some of them went home. They continued protesting. The police never tear gassed them. They never fired rubber bullets at them. They never attacked them with shields and batons. They just had a peaceful protest at night. Amazing, unheard of, unprecedented. You can have a peaceful protest at night. The police don't have to smash everyone just because it's midnight. What? Apparently you can do that in Seattle. We had an earthquake in Las Vegas yesterday. It was pretty exciting. I was here at my desk. I felt my whole desk start shaking and started to wonder whether or not my bookshelves would collapse down upon me. They did not. But apparently we had 89 earthquakes in Nevada in the past 24 hours. That's exciting. It was a 5.1 magnitude earthquake reported near Ridgecrest, California. It was felt in LA and in Las Vegas. So I thought I'd moved away from California and I'd gotten away from the earthquakes, but apparently they just keep following you like tremors. This is a pretty great tweet, even though it's in all caps. It took all 50 states, the Amish, K-pop stans, 13 other countries, witches, Anonymous, the LGBT community, celebrities, Stan Twitter, people of color, white allies, and Batman to get second-degree murder and the 3 cops arrested. And we had the president and the military against us. My God. She later added that Elmo also helped out on our side. Breaking news, continuing information from one of the most recent whistleblowers. Lawmakers tell NBC News that fired Inspector General Steve Linick told Congress today that before he was ousted, he'd informed at least 3 top Pompeo aides that he was reviewing Pompeo and his wife's use of government resources. I remember Pompeo was having the government walk his dog, pick up his dry cleaning, which is not part of the government's job. He then fired the investigator who was investigating him. A clear sign of no malfeasance. Pompeo was also being arrested for his arms deal to Saudi Arabia. But it's a lot more fun to talk about the dog walking, right? Arms deal, dog walking, arms deal, dog walking, arms deal, dog walking. Stick a fork in post-exposure prophylactic hydrochloroquine. It's done. In a randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled study of more than 800 patients in the U.S. and Canada, hydroxychloroquine did nothing to prevent SARS-CoV-19 infection. Just in case you didn't get it. Some of you are a little slow at home. Hydroxychloroquine did nothing. to prevent hydrochloroquine, the infection of the coronavirus. So, president allegedly was taking this medicine, taking his own life at risk there. This medicine does not work for coronavirus. As we said, the Seattle police chief canceled the 9 p.m. curfew at the urging of protesters. The police chief believes that her department can balance public safety and ensure peaceful protests. And she was right. Despite protests that ran curfew, Oakland police also made no arrests. Oakland has a long history of peaceful protest and will continue to create safe spaces while protecting the safety of residences and businesses. Great work, Oakland Police Department. San Francisco and Seattle have called off their curfews. Do the right thing. Cancel the curfew and order police not to use force again against peaceful protesters. Spoiler alert, they did not cancel the curfew in New York City. No, sir. And here it is. Thanks Twitter, for restarting the volume every time. That's always good. So here's the exact moment where police moved in Brooklyn on peaceful protesters. So on one side, you have peaceful protesters exercising their First Amendment right to assemble and redress the government for a petition of grievances. On the other side, you have the militarized shock force moving in their armored helmets and formation, smashing with their batons, pushing people out of the way. Here we go. Actually, it's pretty good. I don't see batons today, but oh, that guy's on the ground. That's not good. Oh, he's got a baton there. It's kind of hard to see what's happening. There's a baton. Oh, yeah, there we go. Now we're doing some smashing. Guy's got his hands up, look like a threat. Must be a threat. There we go. Cops own the streets now. Smash up those whoa, there we go. That guy had a helmet, so he wanted to test it out for him. He's like, does that helmet work? Let's see. Oh, we have a new Monmouth poll. Biden, 52%. Trump, 41%. That's a 12-point advantage. This comes after the Washington Post ABC poll showed Biden 53%, Trump 43%. So a 10 to 12-point advantage to Biden on the head-to-head matchup. I was watching a protester in the background on CNN shine a very bright light directly in the National Guard's faces in Washington, D.C. The guard was showing incredible restraint, just closing their eyes and letting him shine the light directly at them. So there are some good National Guard guys. There are some good police officers who are showing restraint. Strange worlds collide story. I didn't think this was true for a while until I saw official articles confirming it. But the autopsy reports find that George Floyd had the coronavirus. He had tested positive on April 3rd. So every crisis in America has now come together. He also had the coronavirus. Crazy, huh?
Oh my God.
Here's the police in New York City just helping these bicyclists get home by beating them with clubs. So here we go. More people being beat with clubs in New York City. Just great job. NYPD. Sarcasm.
Oh my God.
So there you go, America. Just beating them up.
Oh my God.
I don't know what part of policing is that.
Oh my God.
As Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, horrifying. You start with the tiny possibility that two officers may be walking over to de-escalate the abusive one. Instead, they join in beating a man to get him out of traffic. This isn't a problem of bad apples or incidents. This is an institutional and systemic crisis. We have shots from Tiananmen Square 1989. These were unseen shots from 2018, or these were from 1918, or from 1989, sorry. And you can see the students peacefully exchanging ideas, marching. The idea that China could be different, right? The idea that China didn't have to be a dictatorship and could be a democracy and could have rights for people. And days later, these squares were violently cleared out. The Chinese police beating the people senseless, killing many, forcefully cleared out, their rebellion crushed. This is the anniversary of Tiananmen Square, 1989. The Associated Press shows that more than 10,000 people have been arrested in protests decrying racism and police brutality in the wake of George Floyd's death in Minnesota. 10,000 people. Here's a march in Portland. Crowd looks just as big or bigger than last night when an estimated 10,000 people took to the street. So shout out to Portland, Oregon, continuing to protest in large numbers peacefully. There's no end in sight to the protesters. This is also from Portland. You can see them streaming by. So again, this is not Antifa. These are not radical anti-American, or even, the idea of anti-fascism is actually very American, but no, these are normal people. They think that Black Lives Matter. They're upset about the death of George Floyd, and they're peacefully protesting in the street. These are not looters. These are not criminals, not thugs, not terrorists. These are the people. This is the will of the people. Democracy is the voice of the people. It's the will of the people. Demos means the people. Here's some of the protesters. They had the crowd kneel and put their hands up as though they were being told to by the police. They then held the pose for 9 minutes in honor of George Floyd. Look at that. They filled the freeway with their hands up, peacefully protesting, freely assembled. People from all over the country, all over the world, different types of people, different backgrounds. Look at that. You want to run that over with tanks? You need to tear gas these people? In Washington, D.C., the crowd is chanting, "Hands up, don't shoot." Hands up, don't shoot. To the police, trying to explain to them their peaceful protest. Similar to the other day in Seattle when they were chanting, "We don't see no riot here. Why you got your riot gear?" And the police attacked them with tear gas. They brought the riot. Here's a protest outside of Oakland City Hall with now over 1,000 people. It's grown tenfold before their eyes. It's now 15 minutes past curfew, and there's not a single uniformed police officer. The Oakland police are doing what they'd said and letting the protesters protest. They're not interfering. 1,000 people peacefully protesting in Oakland, California. This protest is the people. Here's downtown Los Angeles. Oh, come on. Give me a little sound. No sound. But you can just see the crowds of people in Los Angeles. If they were all Antifa, oh, we'd have a problem, huh? Like, and if that was really even a terrorist group, if they had any kind of organization or structure, if they existed, if it wasn't just an idea, right? Look at that. Los Angeles. Peaceful protest. Just like in the Constitution. And they even protested in the rain in New York City. They continued to protest, walking forward despite the rain, getting totally soaked. Here are demonstrators in Denver, Colorado, lighting up their cell phones in a tribute to George Floyd. That's pretty cool. Big crowd of people. Denver, Colorado. Peaceful protest. Don't send in the military. Several hundred peaceful protesters laid down in the streets of Des Moines for 8 minutes to protest the murder of George Floyd. America. Peaceful protest. Insurrection Act not needed. From the streets of Baltimore, police officers walk arm in arm with protesters. Violence not needed. This is community policing. See those guys? You can trust those guys. If you have a problem, you can go to those guys. If you get beat up, if you got information, you can talk to them. These are police officers that can work with their community. They're not militarized. They're not attacking their fellow man. In Baltimore. Protesters are having a debate over whether or not they should break curfew. Some say that they need to abide by city rules. Others say, after experiencing oppression for so long, why follow the rules? How exciting for them to be having this debate and this discussion, and for both sides to be represented. Small, scattered installations and signs in commemoration of the Tiananmen Square massacre, and a growing crowd outside Victoria Park, where the Hong Kong government has banned the annual vigil on the grounds of public health. You can see a tank and a man right here in the miniature memorial. Veteran journalist Alan Wu was one of the first to enter the field at Victoria Park, where the protest was not allowed to happen in Hong Kong. He said, the Hong Kong people have continued this vigil for 31 years. The government is abusing the public gathering ban to outlaw it. What makes this year different is this might be the last, and we must continue as long as we can. The Los Angeles mayor is cutting $100 to $150 million from the Los Angeles Police Department budget. Before you get excited, because that sounds like a large number, their budget is actually $3 billion. $3 billion. And put that in this terms, they have about 3,000 million. So of the 3,000 million, I'm sure they'll be glad to give up a minuscule 100 to 150. It's a slap on the wrist. Virginia governor to announce the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue from Richmond. A statue honoring the traitorous American general Robert E. Lee, who trained other military leaders at West Point, then betrayed the United States of America, joining the Confederate Army and leading their forces against the Union. this traitor. Good riddance to traitorous generals. We should remove all Robert E. Lee statues from public lands. And finally, the news story, which might just restart this whole thing. Oh, well, we can't even read it from the Chronicle. Oh, well. San Francisco, well, I'll try to. This is so frustrating. I'd like an ad blocker, please. We need more technology. Here we go. We made it through the wall. Also, they could sell us clothes. Isn't that great? And pop up flash ads at us. Great job, guys. They make reading articles so hard. No wonder no one does it. But we have another sad story for you. A San Francisco resident was kneeling when fatally shot by Vallejo police during civil unrest. Oh, you can't even read the article. Oh, well. So much for news and information these days. San Francisco Chronicle doesn't want you to know. Oh, look at that. They've kind of made it so you can kind of read it. Oh, that's great, guys. The man fatally shot by Vallejo police as the city erupted in chaos Tuesday was kneeling outside a Walgreens and not carrying a firearm when an officer opened fire, sending 5 bullets through his own windshield. Sean Monterosa, 22 years old, of San Francisco, died after the shooting around 12:30 a.m. Tuesday, but the police did not tell the public the man was killed or disclose the circumstances of the shooting until Wednesday at a news conference outside City Hall, a day after calling in 50 troops from the National Guard to help control protests and rioting sparked by the Minnesota police killing of George Floyd. The officer believed that he saw the butt of a handgun pointing out near Monterosa's waist and opened fire due to the perceived threat. Turns out he was carrying a hammer. So I don't know if that means he was one of the looters and it was a bad hammer, or if he's just a handyman and that's his job and he had a hammer, or maybe it was a personal protection hammer. I don't know, but the officer fired 5 times through the windshield of his own car. So the officer didn't say, I'm not sure whose windshield it is. Maybe it's Monterosa's car, or maybe it's the officer's windshield. But either way, there's no, put your hands up, stop right there, drop your weapon. There's none of those. He just shoots him 5 times. So that just happened in the Bay Area. So if you didn't have a reason to protest before, there's your new reason to protest. Meanwhile, our president is such a strong and a mighty force, such an unstoppable person. He's never under threat, that they're installing more fencing around the White House. That's right. They're up-armoring and militarizing the White House, the people's house in America, a decorative house, actually, old house, 1800s, classic building. They used to allow tourists inside. They used to give tours. Now they're building what looks to be a 10-foot fence around the White House. And you know what I have to say about this, of course. General Patton's favorite quote, he said, "Fixed fortifications are a monument to the stupidity of man." Now, why would Patton say that in this case? Well, it's pretty obvious. If you want to get through that fence, all you have to do is know how to get through that fence. If you can knock down a panel of it, you know exactly where that fence is going to be. That fence is never going to move, and that fence is probably not going to change after they've set it down. So it's really easy to engineer an attack that would destroy this fence. We'll see what happens. Ice Cube, did you know tear gassing American citizens is actually illegal? Look it up. He's right. Joshua Zeitz writes, historian here, a head of state using a standing army to occupy an American city, compel citizens off the street, stifle free expression and assembly, using paramilitary forces to smoke clergy out of their churches at the head of state's whim, is pretty much the founder's nightmare. Yep. That's about what they're worried about. That the powers of the presidency were too much, and that the president could then order a standing army to occupy an American city, compel citizens off the street, stifle free expression and assembly, and use paramilitary forces to smoke clergy out of their churches at the whim of the head of state. There's a beautiful moment in Washington, D.C. Thousands of protesters playing the copyright-protected song Lean on Me while they raise lighted cell phones and join their voices with his. I'm sure you can all imagine what the song sounds like, because, you know, YouTube copyright won't allow us to play any songs. Here we are in Iowa City. Let's get a bigger version of that picture. Looks like a winner. Oh, you can't really even see much in this version. So the police have been firing tear gas and flashbangs consistently for the last 20 minutes at protesters, shouting, "Hands up, don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot." There's no curfew in Iowa City, and this protest is completely peaceful. The Iowa City police are instigating violence. Once again, who are the criminals? The looters, the protesters, or the police? I think the looters and the police are the criminals. This was a unbelievable moment of ignorance and stupidity from Fox News. This character, Brian Kilmeade, should just basically removed from television because he's far too stupid to be on television. As it says in the caption, Brian Kilmeade tries to dunk on Bill de Blasio's Imagine reference by saying that John Lennon wouldn't be safe in this city right now. And of course, we all know that John Lennon was murdered in New York City, so he was not safe there then either. Just a totally ignorant and bizarre thing to say. Let's listen to Brian Kilmeade from Fox News destroying his...
He wants you to hum Imagine by John Lennon. He wants us to imagine John Lennon wouldn't be safe in the city right now. He'd be hiding in his apartment.
John Lennon was shot outside of his apartment in New York City. Very sad. Ian Hope writes, "A small girl, maybe 3 years old, was just enveloped in a cloud of tear gas. She screamed while her dad ran away with her." So they're tear gassing children and babies too. It's great. The United States has been added to the most dangerous countries for journalists list for the first time ever. For the first time, the United States is a dangerous country for journalists. That's how bad things are getting. This is a pretty funny tweet. I like this. I later saw the speech that, or the quote that Ben and Jerry's gave. It wasn't that different from this, but here's the funny version. "Every other basic response, we stand with our black employees." You can't see it, but I'm putting my fist in the air right there. Ben and Jerry's response, "We gotta effing smash white supremacy. F the KKK and F you. Black Lives Matter. Our new flavor is called Fuck the Police. It's got blueberries." Ben and Jerry's, a very left-wing political company, does seem to have a very different response than most normal companies. And they also know they've got you. They've got the best ice cream. They have a good product. It's tough to get away from. J.P. Goender writes, "I am a science fiction reader and writer. I'm a bit of a futurist, but even I never imagined economic depression, an out-of-control pandemic, a neo-fascist strongman trying to overthrow U.S. democracy, and a gigantic civil rights movement all happening simultaneously." It is a little much. It is a little much. Today is the 31st anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. This is what the President of the United States said about China's crackdown a year after protests were crushed. This is Donald Trump from 1990. The Chinese government almost blew it. Then they were vicious. They were horrible, but they put it down with strength. That shows you the power of strength. Our country is right now perceived as weak. So even in 1990, the president approved of smashing peaceful protesters with force, and pretty much seems to approve of the horrible way that the Chinese government handled Tiananmen Square. Shocking, but not that shocking. We always knew who he was. This little lady right here is saying, "No justice, no peace." Let's take that.
No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
And this is in Mongkok in Hong Kong. We can see it looks like a really nice neighborhood. I've heard about these fancy shopping areas in Hong Kong. Looks like one of those. But we can see a candlelight visual as the people remember the Tiananmen Square massacre. Another reminder that attacking medical personnel is considered an international war crime. Glenna Grant is expressing her disbelief that the Asheville police destroyed their medical tent. Here she is describing the situation.
We had set up a medical center so that anyone protesting would be safe. We were not protesting. We were not agitating. We had claimed that space. We had set up a triage area in case of any injuries. We had eye wash, sutures, EMTs, doctors, EMS workers. They came in full riot gear, hit us with shields, threw several people to the ground. We were grabbed, thrown, shouted at, screamed at, treated as criminals. No one resisted. We had set up a...
So there are the police in Asheville destroying a medical tent, attacking doctors and nurses, which is, of course, an international war crime. A Fort Lauderdale police officer who was suspended for shoving a protester has been reviewed by Internal Affairs for using force 79 times. 79 times in his 3 years on the force. That's more than 20 times a year. That's almost twice a month. 79 times he's used excessive force. Just a few bad apples, right? Just a few bad apples. Bloomberg crypto analysts argue that the historical patterns and macro factors mean Bitcoin prices are on a path back to the all-time high of $20,000. Sean Monterosa killed by Vallejo police while kneeling on Tuesday. The officer who shot him dead aimed from inside his squad car and shot through his own windshield to strike the 22-year-old 5 times. So even after the killing of George Floyd, police officers are continuing to murder not African American, but young people and innocent human beings, this time in Vallejo. Unemployment is, wait for it. Oh, you know the answer. Getting worse. Unemployment is getting worse. An additional 1.9 million Americans applied for unemployment benefits just this week, ending 5/30. More than 40 million Americans have filed for unemployment in the past 10 weeks. Just a reminder that On June 4th, 1989, the tank man stood in front of a battalion of PLA, Army, and tanks, and he stopped them temporarily. You can't really even see him in this picture. He's down here in the corner. It's blocked off, but Tank Man. There it is. You can see him here. He's very small. He's actually very small in real life, too. It's just one person. Stopped a row of tanks. Of course, the rest of the story, the tanks and everything came back the next day and they massacred everyone anyway. So, oh well. Let's see. Here's another one of clips that they say they never show on the media. And you know how I love to show these. So let's take a look. I think this was in UK, maybe. Maybe the US. It's walking over.
I know you guys are thirsty. I wasn't yelling at y'all. Don't be looking at me like that. Just trying to spread a message, okay? I know you guys out here doing your job. I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at the ones that's doing it to us. You understand? We came out here peaceful, and this is what I'm trying to show y'all. I know y'all thirsty. Y'all gotta get it right now. We're gonna win some to drink, right? Good job, guys. And positive.
Yeah, good stuff. Gives water bottles to the police officers, and the police officers thank him for it. That's good stuff. That's community policing. That's what we like to see. We read this whole article yesterday. Check it out on the end of yesterday's show. I didn't know how long it was. The Atlantic, some of these things can be quite long. It turns out I read for like an hour. But if you would like to hear the article read to you, you should check out this article. It's called History Will Judge the Complicit. And as Annie Applebaum, the author of the article, says, in the past 24 hours, several senior American generals have spoken out to remind Americans that they serve the Constitution, not the president. Where are the senior Republicans? Why don't they offer a similar message? And she has her explanation, an excellent article that compares the story of two men from Eastern Germany, one of which collaborated with the government, the other one escaped and did not collaborate. Then she tells the story of Lindsey Graham, and he's a lawyer for the JAG. He was a military lawyer. He was in the National Guard. He was very pro-America. He seemed to understand what America stood for. Now he sides with the president blindly. On the other side, Mitt Romney, a lawyer from outside the government, made a lot of money. Not really, compared to Graham's background, very different. But Romney stood up against the president. So it's interesting to see who will become a collaborator, why they collaborate, and to use historical examples to try to understand this. It's a great article. Check out yesterday's show about the last hour. You can see where it is if you scan through. There's probably a timestamp. This just happened this morning. I think we're also, fortunately, getting towards the end of the news, which is good. So we have something lighter for you. As you can see from the picture, he looks unhinged in the picture. But yes, Rudy Giuliani went on the news with Piers Morgan over in the UK and really embarrassed himself, really made an ass of himself. He seems out of control. As a Mad Bitcoins character wrote, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Let's take a look at former mayor of New York City, Rudolph Giuliani. He really didn't used to be this crazy, as Piers Morgan himself points out.
Rudy, I'm sorry, but
the interview is over as far as I'm
you
concerned.
sound completely barking mad. Do you know that?
No, I don't.
You've
you
lost the
sound
plot.
like a big
You've
liar.
lost the plot, and it's sad to see.
You're the one who got thrown off of television here.
Yeah.
Because you had ratings that were about 2.
Yeah.
So don't tell me I've lost anything.
You keep going, Rudy.
I know what happened to your show, Piers.
Yeah.
And I remember the mistakes you made.
I remember
And I remember how you sucked up.
Yeah, well, I remember.
So don't give me that stuff. I know who you are.
Well, we'd like
You
to
can say anything
apologise.
you want about me.
We'd like to apologise
But
for the
you're
language you
defaming
just
my
used.
president, and you are helping to create violence in this country with the way you're covering this.
When
And
I
you're
used to
disgraceful.
interview you, you were an intelligent, reasonable man, and you've gone completely mad, and you sound
No,
deranged.
you're
You're
saying
abusive,
that because I
and
don't
it's really,
fit your
it's
phony
really
narrative.
sad to see what's happened to you.
It was really sad to see the way your career imploded in the United States, Pierce.
Yeah.
If you think I have any respect for you after this, well, maybe you don't care.
Well,
But
okay.
everyone in America knows you're a failed journalist.
Really?
So
well, you know
stop
what?
trying to
This
recreate
feels
your
like it's
career
turned
by
into a
this phoniness
personal
about the
You know
argument
what,
United
really?
States.
with you two, and I'm not sure
You know
that
what,
our
Rudy?
viewers
I had
need to watch that.
I had the stomach to stand up and say that your gun culture is completely out of control and unacceptable. And people like you kept telling me, don't be ridiculous.
even
We're
commented on
entitled
this
to go on
next stupid
shooting each
remark
other
that
all
you
day
made.
long.
Now
So
you're lying again.
I will stand by
Go
what I
find the
did.
quotes from me about your stupid comment.
Okay.
I didn't quote that.
All right.
I was
quoted-
nice enough to keep my mouth shut about you because I liked you.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You've come on
But
here.
you were thrown out of your job.
You've come on here. You've been rude and abusive. You sound unhinged.
I haven't been rude.
You've been
You
using
haven't let me answer.
profanity. And you were somebody I used to
didn't use
admire,
profanity.
Rudy.
Tell me
You were
the
somebody I
profanity
used
that
to
I used.
admire.
Okay.
Go
Rudy
ahead, tell me
Giuliani,
that.
thanks
Lie
very
about
much
that, too.
indeed.
What profanity did I use, liar? What
sorry.
profanity did I use?
Well, I don't think we can repeat it, unfortunately.
No, I didn't use any profanity.
What,
You were
okay,
once
so
again
what
lying.
words did you use that we misheard in the studio?
You tell me the profanity I used. Tell me that's exactly what you do to President Trump.
Rudy Giuliani,
It's
thank you very
disgraceful.
much indeed.
So really fantastic piece of tape there. In the beginning, Pierce is lecturing him, trying to bring him back, saying how mad he seems, how angry and completely unhinged. Then, of course, Giuliani responds instantly with a personal attack, not addressing what Pierce is actually saying. He attacks him personally. He attacks his show. There's a bit of a mishearing there. I actually want to side with Giuliani on this one. It sounds like he said, "You fucked up," right? And that's what the anchors clearly think. They give out the language warning. They look a little taken aback. You don't often say fuck on the British airwaves. I think in reality, Giuliani actually says, "You sucked up." So he's saying suck, which is also, pretty dirty and everything, but not as dirty as fuck. Then at the end of the video, Giuliani can't even get himself out of there. He just needs to end the thing. Instead, he gets into an argument about them, whether or not he used profanity, and then kind of accuses them of trying to gaslight him, saying that maybe they do the same thing to Trump. But really great video. I love how Pierce managed to stay so cool throughout the whole thing. And I do believe him when he says that he used to admire Rudolph Giuliani when he was mayor of New York City. And I'm talking before the very strange 9/11 event. Before that, his broken window theory, which I don't even think was his, was someone else's, probably Malcolm Gladwell. But the theory that when you see a broken window on a block, you're more likely to tag it with graffiti. You're more likely to throw your garbage on the street. These bad signs add up to more bad signs. And the idea was if they could fix the broken windows in New York, that maybe then people wouldn't litter and maybe then people wouldn't graffiti everywhere and that it would be a nicer place for people to live. And certainly there's extremes to this theory. The broken window theory also led to stop and frisk under the idea that if you just stop and frisk a lot of people, turns out a lot of black people, as it turns out, that you could eliminate crime. And it was a ridiculous idea, and they ended up just attacking a lot of people. But this broken window theory, at least for buildings, I think was a good one. And Rudy Giuliani fought it and improved New York City, made it a nicer place for people to live and a nicer place to visit. And I don't know who this unhinged character is, and I know there's been a lot of time and a lot of things that have happened, but it really does seem like Rudy Giuliani has lost his mind. So, completely unhinged on TV. Here's some nice stuff to end with. We're getting back to the positive here. Things are turning around. Adam Back writes on Twitter, Bitcoin blockchain is the new wonder of the world. More work and human ingenuity than went into the Great Pyramids of Egypt. The biggest computation ever done. A digital monument. a verifiable artifact of digital gold, the foundation of a new digital age. And that was in response to Peter Woolley's tweet. Let's see if we can pull that up. Peter Woolley writes, I had missed this. With block 632,874 around a day ago, the expected cumulative work in the Bitcoin blockchain surpassed 2 to the 92nd double SHA-256 hashes with a standard deviation around 1.4 times 2 to the 83rd power. So it's a lot of hashes. I'm not going to try to read the number, but yes, there are a lot of hashes, and the Bitcoin blockchain now in Adam Back's mind is similar to the Great Pyramids of Egypt, a digital monument. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Attorney General Barr, the man who gave the order to tear gas peaceful protesters for Trump's photo op, is emerging as the main force behind the over-the-top response in D.C. The man has authoritarian instincts, and he knows how to implement them. They say he's going to attempt to subdue the D.C. protests by, quote-unquote, flooding the zone with federal law enforcement and military soldiers. How one could go so bad. First Twitter, now Snapchat. Trump's war on social media has a new target. That's right, Snapchat is no longer showing the president's snaps in their Discover feed. They do not, I forget their reason. I think it's because he's inciting violence. But they are censoring the president, removing him from their feed. Let's see what the reason is. They said that they would stop promoting Trump's campaign account on its Discover tab. Let's see. They don't specifically say that there was a point or that there was an issue where it blocked it, but I imagine he's been putting out similar information to his tweets on Snapchat, but Snapchat reacted by removing him from the Discover section, so they will no longer be promoting his tweets. Of course, the president responded with a measured and normal response, perfectly normal. They said, Snapchat is trying to rig the 2020 election, illegally using their corporate funding to support Joe Biden and suppress Donald Trump. Trump's campaign manager said in a statement, Snapchat hates that so many of their users watch the president's content, and so they are actively engaging in voter suppression. If you're a conservative, they do not want to hear from you. They do not want you to vote. They view you as a deplorable and do not want you to exist on their platform. So that seems like a really measured response. Snapchat allowed the president's account to continue to exist, despite the horrible things that he's likely saying and showing. But they are not going to promote him in their Discover tab. Of course, that seems like a very reasonable response from the president, saying that Snapchat is rigging the election, saying that Snapchat is engaging in voter suppression. Voter suppression, you usually have to actually suppress the vote to have voter suppression. He also claims that Snapchat doesn't want you to vote. All of this from not including a campaign account on its Discover tag. Not an overreaction at all. Totally reasonable, inline response. I'll bet we have more of that soon. President Jimmy Carter, truly one of the greatest ex-presidents in the history of the United States, said that silence can be as deadly as violence, and called on Americans in positions of power, privilege, and moral conscience to fight racial discrimination in his first public reaction to unrest over George Floyd's death. Shout out to President Carter. I've read a couple of his books, and he's truly amazing. Really a great ex-president, and if they'd allowed him to be, he would have been a great president too. The thing they referred to him yesterday, well, Kaylee did in her little speech, she said, Jimmy Carter's moment where he put on a sweater instead of turning up the heat to save energy. That was in the 70s, but that could be transplanted to just right now because we still have the same energy problems that Carter was talking about. We still need solar panels. Carter famously put solar panels on the roof of like a garden shack or something at the White House. They had a couple of solar panels on there, and they were able to generate energy for them. President Reagan had those solar panels removed instantly. That's how controversial it was to raise power from the sun in the 1970s. Look right now. Solar panels are back on the White House and continuing to be put on most houses in America. All over the place, we're trying to use solar power. So learn more about Carter. The media doesn't give him that great an image, but he's been a fantastic ex-president, starting Habitat for Humanity, helping build homes for human beings all over the United States and the world, traveling to other countries to help other democracies have fair elections, surveying elections. Just incredible, incredible ex-president, Jimmy Carter. Lex, at One Cute Nerd on Twitter, writes, "Y'all do understand that sit-ins were illegal. Sitting at the front of the bus was illegal. Running away as a slave or helping slaves run away was a crime. Just because something is illegal doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do." She nailed that one. This was the scene from Washington, D.C., an hour before midnight. The entire park filled with peaceful protesters. Look at the incredible numbers of people out in force asking the government for a redress of grievances. We've reached the walling yourself off so that enraged citizens don't drag you out of the palace stage of making America great again. Zing. Police shot up a gay bar in Charlotte, North Carolina. The police shot up the gay bar because they were sheltering protesters and giving them water. Once again, attacking medical personnel is a war crime. Even in the United States, still a war crime. Looks like Dr. Rachel Bittekoffer is having an argument with someone on Twitter. She says, outside places like Seattle, looters aren't part of the protests. They are following the protests to use them as cover to go steal shit. So your appeal to the protesters about the PR damage that looting does is useless. Instead, you should use your platform to explain this distinction. And she was quoting a Vox article where Vox suggested that the protesters should stop the looters, when actually it would be much better use of his time to explain that the looters are not the same as the protesters. 43 million Americans unemployed, a botched pandemic response, civil unrest across the country, new videos every day of police violence and misconduct, a president threatening military force against American citizens. Trump has got to go. If you're looking for something nice to watch this morning, you should check out John Lennon's video, Instant Karma, We All Shine On. Instant karma is going to get you, going to knock you right on your head. You better get yourself together, darling. Pretty soon you're going to be dead. And it's a very interesting music video from January 1970. Yoko seems to be knitting while blindfolded on stage during the video. Yoko. The New York Times has staffers who are denouncing the newspaper for the Tom Cotton editorial, which urged military incursion into U.S. cities. Seems like the New York Times got caught in one of those postmodern traps, where on one side, if you have an editorial that says, no, you shouldn't attack the American people with tanks, On the other side, for fairness, you must, of course, have a video or have an article that says you should attack the American people with tanks. This idea of fairness has gone way too far. There are good people on both sides, both the side that says you should attack Americans with tanks and the side that says you shouldn't. Newspapers need to take a stand. They can't just keep trying to be so fair. It doesn't make any sense. This was a pretty cool story, and maybe kind of a positive note to try to uplift us towards the end of the show here. Kenny DeForest, at Kenny DeForest on Twitter, writes, and I'm just going to read because it was so fun, but this is his story, of course. My coolest night of comedy was when Chappelle dropped by Comedy at the Knit when Mr. Will Myers and the Clark Jones and I were still hosting. We were in the back room, and he was in town supporting Kevin Hart on SNL. I texted Joelle and Nicole, like, any chance Dave wants to go up? And now the story. We start the show thinking he might come. A couple of comics in, he sneaks in like a boxer with his hood up. We were in the green room, smoking, drinking, and joking. The dude is a machine. Every topic that came up, he had something profound for. We bring him up last. The crowd loses it. He was asking the crowd for headlines to riff off. They toss one out, he riffs a joke. Every topic he immediately had a perfect joke for. Now this was in the days after the cop who had choked Eric Gardner to death in Staten Island, murder, was not indicted by a grand jury. Protests, etc., were all over the city. Tensions were high. About 15 to 20 minutes into his set, he asks for another topic and someone shouts, "Police brutality." He pauses, then says, "You really want to do this? Okay." He chugs his Tecate and sets it down. Our crowd was always beautifully mixed. The show was started by Hannibal Buress, so it's always had a black base, but it's in Williamsburg, so there are always hipsters of all persuasions and, amazingly, people from all over the world. We always had global tourists, which I thought was incredible for a free bar show. So Chappelle starts talking about Eric Gardner and watching him get murdered in cold blood on camera and how it makes him scared for his children. I remember he said, "I thought body cams would help, but what good is video evidence if you all don't care?" A clearly privileged white girl, she had a wide-brimmed felt hat for Christ's sakes, shouts out, "Life's hard. Sorry about it," and takes the air completely out of the room. A collective gasp. Chappelle zeroes in on her. "What did you say?" She repeats it. Chappelle starts going in. He starts educating the crowd on the history of black people and the police. He talked about slave patrols and Rodney King and Watts and Emmett Till and Black Wall Street. He talked about Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and he talked about John Crawford III. If you don't remember John Crawford III, Google it. It happened right around the time of some of the other high-profile killings, but it's just as awful as anything you'll see. He was on the phone in Walmart and picked up a BB gun that was for sale in said Walmart, and he was just looking at it. Some scared cracker ass called the cops, and this officer comes in, doesn't even bother saying drop the weapon or hands up, and just guns him down. The security footage makes it plain as day. The footage will make you sick. Disgusting and outrageous in every conceivable way. Chappelle then tells a story about being pulled over in rural Ohio where he lives. This is before the Crawford shooting, but after Ferguson, so racial tension is bubbling. He said, "I might be white on paper, but I'm still black, so I'm nervous." He says, "The cop approaches me and he can tell I'm nervous. I have both hands on the wheel and I say, 'Officer, my license and registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them now. I promise I'm not armed.' I could tell the officer was offended that I was nervous. He said, 'I know who you are, Dave Chappelle.' And I said, 'So why do you need my license and registration?' He gets off with a warning. The twist? The same cop would go on to murder John Crawford III. His takeaway? I shouldn't have to be Dave Chappelle to survive police encounters. He goes on to explain that one of his best friends is South African. He said, I asked him what it was like in South Africa right before apartheid ended, and he said it was chaos in the streets. There were riots and car bombs, etc. But the amount of people caring hit critical mass, and then there was nothing they could do to stop it. The people had momentum, and apartheid ended. Critical mass. That's what we have to hit. Once enough of you care, there will be nothing they can do to stop the change. It was incredibly powerful. The crowd was somber and silent. After the show, we're in the green room. Joy Ellen Nicole comes back and says, that dumbass white girl wanted to talk to you, but I told her you were busy. And he goes, no, bring her back. So Joyelle leaves and comes back with wide-brimmed Hat Girl and her friend. Hat Girl is humiliated, and her friend even more so. Hat Girl speaks first. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what I said, and thank you for educating me. I was ignorant before, but I want you to know that I learned from you tonight, and I won't say things like that anymore. Chappelle responds, you're okay. That's all we can ask. Know better, do better. I want to thank you for hearing me and listening. That's your role. And now you know, now you're part of that critical mass we talked about. And next time you hear a friend say some ignorant shit like you said, it's your job to correct them and share with them what you learned tonight. Then you're no longer part of the problem. You're part of the solution. She starts crying and he pulls her in for a hug. It's okay. You're part of the solution now. Do you want a picture? She says, really? And then he says, of course. Friend, get over here for a picture. The friend approaches. They take pictures. He hugs them both and reiterates that it's okay just to be part of the solution and sends them on their way. Class. I couldn't believe what I witnessed. He changed everyone in the room that night. 200 more people became part of the solution if they weren't already. Even a privileged girl in a privileged hat with a privileged mindset. The point is, it doesn't matter what you thought before. You can always change. And you can always become part of the critical mass that is trying to push this shit forward. All you have to do is care and allow that care to become education and action. I've been sitting on this story since January 19th, 2015. I wanted to respect his process and not burn any material for him, but since he's released hours of material since then, I think it's safe to say he won't be using any of this because he's a genius who can just come up with more. A complete shout out to Kenny DeForest for telling us the story, and to Dave Chappelle for just being incredible and amazing. So I've heard other stories of Chappelle stand-up, maybe not as politically charged, but just how amazing he is, how he comes into the middle of the night, and how he does 2 to 4 hours just standing on his heels. Just incredible work. So beautiful story of Dave Chappelle that you should just go out there and be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I think we're going to head towards the end here. That was a great story to end on. Here's a great one. So as you guys recall, George Floyd, originally the reason they were arresting him was he was allegedly passing a counterfeit $20 bill. I mean, who even cares? But a counterfeit $20 bill. As Jim from The Office here says, shout out to Sal the agorist. Not sure if he made this, but it's great anyway. It says, if the cops can arrest and kill someone for counterfeit currency, they'd be shocked to learn about the Federal Reserve. So there we go. Get some jokes to get you out of here. We've got the Chicago police brutalizing protesters. Ugh, that's not a good look. Thought we were going to end on something positive. Come on. Guys even got the blue helmets, right? Oh, well. At least all 4 officers charged in the death of George Floyd are now in police custody. That's a good thing. We can celebrate that. And Lindsey Graham thinks that Jim Mattis has been suckered by the anti-Trump liberal media. What a contrast with the article yesterday where the author shows Lindsey Graham, a judge, advocate, general, lawyer, a military lawyer, a member of the National Guard, a member of the military, and how he became a collaborator with Trump, whereas Romney, the corporate lawyer, turned out to fight against Trump. Let's hear a little bit of the collaborator, Lindsey Graham, explain why Jim Mattis, the general, is confused. Collaborator.
Better America, better place by having a conversation and take constructive actions. To General Mattis, I think you're missing something here, my friend. You're missing the fact that the liberal media has taken every event in the last 3.5 years and laid it at the president's feet. I'm not saying he's blameless, but I am saying that you're buying into a narrative that I think is, quite frankly, unfair. Better America.
Well, that was about the biggest red herring that I've ever seen. You can't accuse Trump of that because 3.5 years the media has been attacking him for 3.5 years. That's how big my red herring is. Don't answer the actual question. Don't focus on what he actually said. Just say 3.5 years. Oh, what a distraction. Well, I thought this one was really good. Alexandra Aaron writes, police say they can't do their jobs unless they are allowed to open fire at the slightest fear for their lives. They are allowed to use force to punish people they find disrespectful, and that they are allowed to lie to the people they serve. Conclusion, they're unqualified. Agree with that. This is a preview of coming attractions. The Senate Intel Committee just completed its report detailing the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign. And Trump has been escalating his attacks on everyone involved in it. Looks like this is big, and Trump wants to control the redactions. So we'll see if we get an unredacted version of this report, or if they're able to hide enough of it that we can't understand it. And here it is, a fitting image to mark the end of this presidency. A vain, confused, furious man, alone in his bunker, under a darkened White House, surrounded at last by his fence and his wall. There it is, the White House, behind a new fence, making America great again, building that wall. We only wonder if Mexico will pay for it. So thanks to everybody for joining us today. Be sure to give us a thumbs up and a share down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that bell to receive notifications. It'll send you an email every time we go live. But if you don't click on the email, it'll stop sending it. So if you really want notifications, make sure it's turned on and make sure you click on them. That's just how the algorithm works. But thanks so much for joining us. Leave a comment down below. I meant to do yesterday's comments today, but I didn't. There's just too much to talk about. But shout out to Roy in the comments. He's been leaving some really good ones. Also, he's been doing some time stamping. If you ever see something on here and you think that's a really great statement, or that's the beginning of where he started reading that really long article or something like that, you can always timestamp it in the YouTube comments. You don't need a special tool or anything. You just write down the full timestamp. For example, right now, 2 hours, 09, 43 seconds. And that just right there by itself will create a link to that point in the video. So if you want to say, I agree with this, I disagree with that, and you want to provide a link to the specific timestamp, you can do that in the comments. And it's really helpful to have debates with people, and so other people can skip around. Sometimes these videos are really long, so it helps a lot to have timestamps. So thanks to Roy for doing that. And thanks to Jeremy. He's been timestamping the Bitcoin group Seems like for years. So fantastic work, Jeremy. Thank you so much, and thanks to Roy. So thanks to everybody for joining us. Have a good day. Try to stay out of trouble. And I'm going to go drink some more water because it's hot here in Vegas today. So bye-bye.